The night settles softly over the land. Far above the dark earth, countless stars rest quietly across the sky. They shine over fields, rivers, roads, rooftops, and sleeping towns. The air feels cool now. The warmth of the day has finally begun to fade. Somewhere in the distance, a gentle breeze moves through tall grass. A few leaves shift against one another. A dog stirs briefly before returning to sleep. In a Victorian town, long before electric lights filled the streets, darkness arrived slowly and completely. Windows glowed with candlelight. Thin lines of golden light slipped through curtains and wooden shutters. The lamps inside homes burned quietly. Their flames moved gently whenever a door opened or a draft entered a room. Most families had already finished their evening meal. Dishes had been washed. Tables had been cleared. The work of the day was finally ending. For children, however, the evening carried its own lessons. These were not lessons written inside school books. They were not lessons spoken from classroom desks. They were quieter than that. They were lessons learned from rooms filled with stillness. Lessons learned from long hours of proper behavior. Lessons learned from waiting. From watching. From remaining silent. In many Victorian homes, silence was considered a sign of good character. A quiet child was often viewed as a well-behaved child. Parents spoke about self-control with great seriousness. Teachers spoke about discipline. Religious leaders spoke about patience. Across many parts of society, children heard similar ideas repeated again and again. Good children listened. Good children waited. Good children did not interrupt. As evening settled across the streets, many young boys and girls found themselves sitting quietly beside adults. The room might contain a father reading a newspaper, a mother sewing by candlelight, an older relative sitting near the fireplace. The adults worked or rested. The children remained nearby. Sometimes nobody spoke for several minutes at a time. The only sounds came from a clock ticking on the wall. Tick, tick, tick. The rhythm seemed almost endless. Outside, horses moved along cobblestone streets. A carriage wheel rattled briefly in the distance. Then quiet returned once more. Many children grew up surrounded by moments like these. Silence became a familiar companion. At first, very young children often struggled with it. Their minds were active. They wanted to ask questions. They wanted to tell stories. They wanted to share every small thought that appeared inside their heads. But Victorian childhood often asked them to hold those thoughts back. Not forever. Only until the proper moment. The idea of the proper moment was important. Adults believed children should learn restraint. Patience was treated almost like a skill. The ability to sit quietly for long periods was praised. The ability to wait before speaking was admired. Over time, many children slowly learned these habits. The process happened day after day. Year after year. Small moments collected together. A child entered a room. Adults were talking. The child waited. A child wanted to ask a question. The adults finished speaking first. A child felt excited about some event. Yet excitement was expected to remain controlled. Gradually, these lessons became part of everyday life. Morning often began early. Long before sunrise, many households were already stirring. The first sounds came from servants preparing fires or from parents beginning household work. The darkness outside slowly turned gray. Then pale light spread across rooftops. Children climbed from their beds. Bedrooms were often simple places. The rooms could feel cold during winter mornings. Blankets were folded. Faces were washed. Hair was brushed. Clothing was carefully arranged. Even these early routines carried expectations. Children learned that noise should be limited. They learned that order mattered. A tidy room reflected a tidy mind. At least that was what many adults believed. Breakfast followed. The meal might be plain. Bread, porridge, tea. Simple foods that provided energy for the day ahead. Conversations sometimes happened during breakfast. But many families preferred a calm atmosphere. Voices stayed low. Movements remained orderly. The day had barely begun, yet children were already practicing self-control. Outside the home, similar expectations waited. Schools often emphasized discipline. Rows of desks stood neatly inside classrooms. Students sat upright. Teachers watched carefully. Lessons could last for hours. Reading, writing, arithmetic, recitation. Many classrooms valued quiet concentration. The scratch of pencil on paper became one of the loudest sounds in the room. A child who spoke without permission might receive a stern look. Sometimes a warning. Sometimes a punishment. The goal was not simply learning facts. The goal was also learning behavior. Silence became connected to responsibility. Children heard this message repeatedly. By afternoon, the streets outside filled with ordinary activity. Workers moved between shops. Merchants arranged goods in windows. Factory whistles sounded in industrial districts. Carts rolled over uneven roads. Life remained busy. Yet even in these active surroundings, Victorian children often carried an awareness of proper conduct. A young boy walking beside his father might be expected to remain respectful and composed. A young girl visiting relatives might be expected to speak politely and avoid drawing attention to herself. Many children learn to observe before acting, to watch before speaking, to measure their words carefully. As the years passed, observation became an important part of childhood. A child sitting quietly often noticed details that others ignored. The pattern of rain on a window. The movement of candle shadows across wallpaper. The sound of distant church bells drifting through evening fog. The slow creak of floorboards in an old house. The rustle of pages turning. The soft crackle of coal burning in a fireplace. These small sounds filled the spaces where conversation might otherwise have existed. Silence was rarely empty. Instead, it carried countless tiny noises. A world hidden beneath louder activity. Many Victorian children became familiar with this world. Some spent long hours indoors, especially during cold weather. Rain tapped steadily against glass. Wind moved around corners of buildings. The daylight faded early. Inside, families remained gathered together. Needlework continued. Letters were written. Books were read. Children occupied themselves quietly. A puzzle. A storybook. A piece of sewing. Simple activities that required patience. The room settled into a rhythm of calm work. Nobody hurried. Nobody rushed. Time moved slowly. For some children, these quiet hours felt comforting. For others, they felt endless. Yet both experiences taught the same lesson. Life contained periods of stillness. And stillness could be endured. In wealthier homes, children sometimes spent time in nurseries under the care of governesses or nurses. These environments often had their own rules. Manners mattered. Posture mattered. Speech mattered. A child learned when to speak and when to remain silent. Stories were read aloud. Lessons were practiced. Walks were taken through gardens or parks. Even moments of play could contain expectations of order and restraint. In working families, childhood looked different in many ways. Yet silence still appeared. Children often helped with chores. They assisted parents. They cared for younger siblings. Work filled much of the day. After hours of labor, exhaustion naturally brought quiet. Evening conversations became shorter. Bodies needed rest. Voices softened. The simple need for sleep encouraged stillness. As darkness deepened outside, lamps burned lower. Shadows stretched across walls. Children climbed staircases toward bedrooms. Wooden steps creaked beneath their feet. One candle might illuminate the entire journey. The hallway remained dim. The bedroom felt calm. Perhaps several siblings shared the room. Beds stood side by side. Blankets waited. The sounds of the house gradually faded. A distant door closed. Someone coughed downstairs. The clock continued its steady work. Tick. 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 Children lay awake for a few moments. Listening. Thinking. Remembering the day. Tomorrow would bring lessons. Chores. Expectations. Rules. Much of childhood involved learning how to exist within these structures. Not all children accepted them easily. Some resisted. Some dreamed of greater freedom. Some whispered stories after bedtime when adults could no longer hear. Yet even these moments happened within a world that valued quietness. Silence surrounded them. And slowly, year after year, it shaped them. Many adults believed silence encouraged reflection. A quiet child had time to think. Time to examine behavior. Time to develop character. Whether or not every child agreed with this idea hardly mattered. The belief remained powerful. It influenced homes, schools, churches, communities. Entire generations grew up hearing similar messages. The influence reached even into leisure. When families visited church services, long periods of quiet attention were expected. Children sat beside parents. The service unfolded slowly. Voices echoed beneath high ceilings. Sunlight filtered through colored glass. The room remained calm. A restless child quickly understood what behavior was expected. Patience became part of the experience. Waiting became part of the experience. Listening became part of the experience. These habits followed children beyond childhood itself. Yet while they were young, the lessons arrived gradually. Rarely through dramatic events. Usually through ordinary days. One afternoon after another. One evening after another. One quiet room after another. Outside, the Victorian world continued changing. Cities expanded. Railways stretched across landscapes. Factories multiplied. New inventions appeared. Crowds grew larger. Noise increased in many places. Yet inside homes, many traditional expectations remained surprisingly steady. Children still practiced self-control. Adults still praised calm behavior. The value of silence endured. And so, on countless evenings beneath the glow of candles and oil lamps, children sat quietly in rooms where time seemed to move very slowly. They listened to clocks. They watched shadows. They learned to wait. And without fully realizing it, they were beginning to understand a language that required no words at all. The language of silence. It was spoken in pauses. In stillness. in patient observation, in quiet acceptance. And as another Victorian night settled gently over rooftops and chimneys, countless young minds rested within that quiet world, absorbing its lessons one peaceful moment at a time. Morning returned slowly, almost without notice. The darkness outside the bedroom windows softened into pale gray. A faint light rested over rooftops, church towers, narrow streets, and gardens still wet with dew. Before the first rays of sunlight touched the bricks of the houses, many homes were already beginning another familiar day. Somewhere below, someone stirred the kitchen fire. A poker gently touched glowing coals. Wood settled with a quiet crack. Soon the faint smell of smoke drifted upward through the house. For many Victorian children, waking was not a sudden moment but a slow return to routine. They opened their eyes to the same ceiling they had seen every morning for years. The room felt cool. Heavy curtains softened the growing daylight. The blankets still held the warmth of sleep for just a little longer. Then the day quietly called them forward. Beds were straightened carefully. Night clothes were folded. Wash basins filled the room with the soft sound of water splashing against porcelain. Faces were washed with cool water that chased away the last traces of sleep. Hair was combed with patient hands. No one hurried. Even when there was much to do, haste was rarely admired. A calm beginning suggested a disciplined day. Children learned this lesson without anyone needing to explain it every morning. The house itself seemed to encourage quiet movements. Wooden floors carried every footstep. Doors creaked if closed too quickly. Staircases answered every careless movement with a long gentle groan. Many children instinctively learned where to place each foot so that the stairs would remain as silent as possible. These little discoveries became part of growing up. Every house had its own sounds. Every hallway had its own voice. Some windows rattled softly when the wind changed direction. Some fireplaces sighed gently as warm air rose through the chimney. Even silence contained familiar companions. When breakfast was ready, family members gathered around the table. Steam rose from bowls of porridge. Fresh bread rested beneath a clean cloth. Butter waited in small dishes. Tea warmed delicate cups. The morning meal often passed quietly. Parents discussed the plans for the day. Children listened. If they wished to speak, they usually waited until the adults had finished. No one needed to remind them every single day. The habit had already become part of their lives. For the youngest children, this waiting sometimes felt difficult. A curious thought could arrive suddenly. Perhaps they had noticed a robin outside the window. Perhaps they remembered a dream from the night before. Perhaps they wanted to ask why the clouds looked different this morning. The question remained inside for a little while. They learned that not every thought needed immediate expression. Sometimes waiting became almost invisible. The child no longer thought about remaining silent. The pause happened naturally. Outside, the town slowly awakened. Milk carts rolled along the streets. Shopkeepers unlocked heavy wooden doors. Street sweepers pushed brooms across stone roads still damp from the cool night air. The sounds of work spread gently through the neighborhood. Yet inside many homes, voices remained calm. The beginning of the day carried its own quiet dignity. Children who attended school gathered their books carefully. Slates, copybooks, pencils, and readers were placed into bags or held beneath an arm. Shoes were checked. Buttons fastened. Collars straightened. Parents often believed that neat clothing reflected careful character. Appearance and behavior belonged together. Both required attention. The walk to school could be peaceful. Some children traveled with brothers and sisters. Others walked beside neighbors. The street slowly filled with young faces moving toward classrooms. They passed bakeries where warm bread cooled in the windows. The sweet smell drifted into the morning air. Blacksmiths had already begun their work. Each strike of the hammer echoed through nearby streets. A horse pulled a wagon filled with sacks of flour. The steady rhythm of hooves blended with distant church bells announcing another hour. Children observed all of this while continuing quietly along their way. Many did not chatter constantly. Conversation came and went like gentle waves. Sometimes they simply walked together. The silence between friends did not always feel uncomfortable. It became another familiar part of ordinary life. Inside the schoolhouse, order greeted them immediately. Rows of desks waited patiently. The teacher's chair stood at the front of the room. Large windows admitted soft daylight that slowly brightened the wooden floor. Children entered with measured steps. Coats were hung. Books placed carefully upon desks. The room filled gradually, yet it remained surprisingly calm. Each student understood the expectations. Lessons began promptly. The teacher's voice carried evenly across the classroom. Children repeated words together. They practiced reading aloud. One by one they stood to recite passages they had memorized. Then silence returned while another child spoke. Listening was treated almost as carefully as speaking. The teacher expected every student to give complete attention. Eyes remained forward. Hands rested upon desks. Feet stayed still beneath wooden benches. These habits required practice. Young children naturally wished to move. Their legs became restless. Their fingers searched for something to touch. Their thoughts wandered toward birds outside the window or clouds drifting overhead. But each gentle correction slowly guided them back. Not through loud anger every day. Often simply through expectation. The expectation itself became powerful. Children rarely wished to disappoint respected adults. So they practiced again. Day after day. Week after week. The classroom settled into quiet rhythms. Outside, the changing seasons quietly transformed the landscape. Spring brought fresh leaves. Rain washed dust from streets. Gardens slowly awakened beneath gentle sunshine. Children noticed these changes during walks to school. Yet even moments of beauty were often appreciated quietly. A child might pause for just a second to admire blossoms opening beside a garden wall. Then continue walking without saying anything at all. Observation became its own quiet pleasure. Summer arrived with longer days. Open windows allowed warm air to enter classrooms. The scent of fresh grass drifted inside. Sometimes bees wandered close to the windows before continuing their own journeys. Children heard distant birds singing beyond the schoolyard. The outside world seemed inviting. Still, lessons continued. Books opened. Pens scratched softly across paper. The patient work of education carried on. Autumn changed everything once again. Leaves drifted across roads. Morning air became cooler. Children wrapped scarves around their necks before leaving home. Fog sometimes rested over the streets until late morning. Buildings emerged slowly from the mist. The world itself seemed quieter. Footsteps sounded softer. Voices traveled differently through the damp air. Many children remembered these peaceful mornings throughout their lives. Winter brought another kind of silence. Snow-covered rooftops. Ice-decorated window panes with delicate patterns. The streets looked softer beneath fresh snowfall. Even busy neighborhoods became unusually calm. Wagon wheels rolled more quietly. Footsteps disappeared into white paths. Children noticed how the whole world seemed to whisper. Inside homes, fires burned steadily. Families gathered close together. Needles moved through cloth. Books rested upon laps. Tea steamed gently from cups. The silence of winter evenings often felt warm rather than lonely. Many children came to understand that quietness could hold comfort. Not every silent room felt strict. Some silent rooms felt safe. A grandmother might knit beside the fire. Her hands moved with years of experience. The needles clicked softly together. A grandfather might polish his spectacles before opening a favorite book. A younger child might curl beneath a blanket while watching the firelight dance across the walls. No one felt pressure to fill every moment with conversation. Simply sharing the same room was enough. Children slowly learned another lesson from these evenings. Presence did not always require words. Love itself could be quiet. Care could appear through small actions instead of long speeches. A warm blanket placed over cold shoulders. A freshly baked loaf of bread resting upon the table. A parent adjusting a candle so the light reached a child's book more easily. These gentle gestures often spoke more deeply than many conversations. As children grew older, they began helping more within the household. Responsibility arrived gradually. A boy might polish shoes before breakfast. A girl might help prepare vegetables for supper. Another child carried water from the pump. Someone swept the hallway. Someone dusted shelves. The work itself encouraged steady concentration. Tasks were completed carefully. Talking too much often slowed the work. So quiet effort became natural. There was satisfaction in hearing only the broom moving across the floor. Or the gentle splash of water filling a bucket. Or the soft brushing of cloth against polished wood. Simple sounds marked honest labor. Children also learned that adults often trusted those who remained calm. A child who completed chores without complaint earned quiet respect. Reliability became closely connected with self-control. These values shaped many homes. Not through grand speeches, but through countless ordinary mornings. Sometimes a visitor arrived unexpectedly. The front door opened. Coats were removed. Greetings exchanged. Children often entered the room politely before stepping back to allow the adults to visit. They might remain nearby with a book or quiet activity. Listening without interrupting became another familiar practice. From these conversations they learned about the wider world. Harvests. Weather. Family news. Local events. Business. Church gatherings. The children absorbed these stories quietly, gathering small pieces of adult life long before they fully understood them. There were moments when silence became difficult. A child might feel unfairly corrected. Another might wish desperately to laugh during a serious occasion. Someone might carry disappointment after making a mistake. Strong emotions visited every childhood. Victorian children were no different. Yet many were encouraged to master those feelings before expressing them. This did not mean they never cried, or never smiled. Rather, they learned that emotions also had their proper time and place. Waiting became woven into nearly every part of growing up. Waiting before speaking. Waiting before asking. Waiting before reacting. At first these pauses felt long. Then they became ordinary. Eventually many children hardly noticed them at all. The rhythm of quiet patience settled gently into everyday life. Even the natural world seemed to offer examples. They watched rain fall without hurry. Clouds drifted slowly across the sky. Trees remained perfectly still until the breeze returned. The changing light moved patiently across the rooms of the house. Morning became afternoon. Afternoon became evening. The clock continued its steady conversation with time. Tick. 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 Children often measured their days by those familiar sounds. The clock never rushed. It never complained. It simply continued. Perhaps without realizing it, many children found comfort in that steady rhythm. The world felt dependable. The same bells rang each hour. The same streets welcomed them home. The same lamps glowed each evening. The same quiet expectations greeted them every morning. Life moved slowly enough for habits to become deeply rooted. And among those habits, silence quietly grew. Not as an empty space, but as a place where thoughts settled gently. Where patience stretched comfortably across the hours. Where childhood slowly unfolded, one peaceful day at a time, beneath soft skies, warm candlelight, and the quiet rhythm of an ordinary Victorian home. As one quiet day gently folded into the next, the lessons of silence became less like rules and more like the steady rhythm of life itself. The children who had once counted the moments until they could speak now found themselves listening more than they had before. They listened not only to the voices of parents and teachers, but also to the countless small sounds that filled an ordinary Victorian day. Morning rain tapping softly against window glass. The careful sweep of a broom across worn wooden floors. The gentle rustle of curtains moving with a cool breeze. The distant call of a street vendor beginning another day's work. The quiet life of a house revealed itself to anyone willing to listen patiently. Many homes woke before the sun had fully climbed into the sky. The kitchen was often the first room to come alive. Someone struck a match. A small flame appeared. Kindling caught slowly. Soon the fire breathed with a steady warmth. A kettle rested above the growing heat. Its soft whisper gradually filled the room. For children, these sounds became familiar companions. They heard them every morning for years, until they could almost tell the time of day simply by listening. The smell of fresh bread often followed. Flour dust rested lightly upon wooden tables. Hands kneaded dough with practiced movements. The work required strength, but it also required patience. Nothing happened quickly. The dough needed time. The fire needed attention. The bread slowly became what it was meant to be. Children watched these quiet routines many times. Without anyone saying so directly, they learned that worthwhile things often happened slowly. Even breakfast carried its own peaceful rhythm. Steam rose gently from warm bowls. Metal spoons rested quietly against porcelain. A chair slid softly across the floor as someone took a seat. No one hurried through the meal. The beginning of the day deserved calm attention. Outside, the neighborhood slowly opened its eyes. Shopkeepers swept the front steps of their businesses. A baker placed fresh loaves into the front window. The milkman guided his horse along familiar streets. People greeted one another politely. Their conversations were often brief. There was work waiting. Victorian towns could certainly be busy places, but much of that busyness moved with a steady pace instead of rushing wildly. Children noticed this. Adults rarely ran unless there was great need. Most simply walked. Purposefully. Quietly. One step after another. When children walked beside their parents, they often matched that same pace. Small shoes tapped gently against stone paths. Sometimes they crossed narrow bridges over quiet streams. Sometimes they passed rows of brick houses where curtains had just been opened to welcome the morning light. The world felt dependable. Every street held familiar sights. Every corner offered recognizable faces. This sense of order gave children comfort. They knew where they belonged. They understood what was expected. In many homes, respect was shown not through loud praise but through steady behavior. Parents did not always explain every expectation with long conversations. Instead, children watched. Observation became one of the greatest teachers of all. A little girl noticed how her mother greeted older neighbors with gentle courtesy. A young boy watched his father remove his hat before entering church. Brothers watched older brothers. Sisters watched older sisters. The youngest members of the family quietly gathered these examples day after day. Much of childhood happened through imitation. Silence gave them room to notice details. They observed how adults waited for others to finish speaking. They noticed how voices became softer when someone was ill. They saw how people stood respectfully during solemn occasions. Little by little, these actions became familiar. No single lesson changed everything. Instead, thousands of ordinary moments slowly shaped growing minds. Afternoons often brought household work. Children rarely spent every hour playing. Many families depended upon everyone's help. The tasks varied from home to home. One child polished boots until the leather reflected the afternoon light. Another folded freshly dried clothes with careful hands. Someone peeled potatoes for the evening meal. Someone carried coal for the fireplace. These jobs were not always exciting. They were repeated again and again. The repetition itself became another quiet teacher. There was comfort in familiar work. Hands learned exactly what to do. Thoughts wandered peacefully while simple tasks continued. Many children remembered these afternoons long after they became adults. The smell of soap. The warmth of sunlight resting upon kitchen windows. The feeling of smooth wooden handles worn by years of use. The soft sound of cloth being folded. These memories remained gentle. As the hours passed, the sunlight shifted slowly across the rooms. Bright patches moved along the floor. Dust floated through narrow beams of light. Children sometimes paused for a brief moment to watch tiny particles drifting through the air. They seemed to move without effort. Without hurry. The whole house appeared to breathe quietly. During these calm hours, books sometimes offered another kind of silence. Reading was encouraged in many families whenever time allowed. A child opened a worn volume with great care. The pages carried the faint smell of paper and ink. Illustrations appeared here and there between lines of text. The room remained almost completely still except for the gentle turning of pages. Reading asked children to become quiet inside as well as outside. Their eyes moved slowly from sentence to sentence. Their imagination awakened without making a sound. Stories unfolded inside their minds while the room around them remained peaceful. Not every child loved reading immediately. Some found it difficult. Others discovered deep comfort within books. Yet nearly all experienced the quiet concentration that reading required. It became another exercise in patience. Outside, the weather continued changing with gentle certainty. A spring shower arrived unexpectedly. Rain covered rooftops with a soft, steady rhythm. Children stood near windows watching droplets race one another down the glass. Nobody could hurry the rain. They simply watched. When the clouds finally drifted away, sunlight returned as quietly as it had disappeared. Puddles reflected pale blue skies. Birds resumed their songs. The world seemed freshly washed. Autumn afternoons carried different sounds. Dry leaves gathered along sidewalks. The wind moved them gently into little circles before scattering them once more. Branches touched one another high above quiet streets. Children walked beneath those trees on their way home from school. Many liked hearing the crisp leaves beneath their boots. The sound was simple, gentle, familiar. Winter evenings invited everyone indoors earlier than usual. Darkness arrived before supper. Lamps were lit while the sky still held a faint blue glow. The windows reflected the room instead of the street outside. Families gathered close together around warmth. The fire became the quiet center of the house. Its flames rose and settled with slow, peaceful movements. Coal shifted occasionally with a soft crack. Orange light danced across bookshelves, polished furniture, and framed photographs. Children often found themselves simply watching the fire. There was something calming about its steady movement. No two flames looked exactly alike. Yet together they created the same feeling every evening. Warmth. Safety. Stillness. Sometimes an older family member told a story. The voice remained calm. No one interrupted. The younger children listened carefully. Stories were not hurried. Each sentence arrived slowly. Each pause felt natural. Silence rested gently between the words. The pauses themselves became part of the storytelling. Children learned that listening carefully honored the person who spoke. In return, when it became their turn to tell a story, others listened to them with equal patience. Conversation itself followed a peaceful rhythm. Not every silence needed filling. This idea slowly became familiar. Today a child might remain quiet while thinking of the right words. Tomorrow another family member might do the same. No one seemed troubled by these pauses. Thinking deserved time. Careful words deserved patience. In schools, teachers often rewarded neatness. Carefully formed letters. Straight lines. Clean pages. Writing itself required remarkable stillness. An ink pen could not be rushed. Too much speed invited mistakes. Too much pressure broke the delicate rhythm of the page. Children practiced over and over. Their handwriting gradually became smoother. Their movements calmer. The quiet concentration needed for writing reached beyond the classroom. It became part of their character. Music also entered many Victorian homes, though often in gentle ways. A piano stood in the corner of a sitting room. Its polished wood reflected candlelight. Someone played a simple melody. The notes floated softly through the house before fading into silence once again. Children learned something beautiful during those moments. Music was lovely because silence surrounded it. Without quiet, the gentle notes would lose much of their meaning. The spaces between sounds mattered just as much as the sounds themselves. This lesson reached far beyond music. It quietly shaped the way many children understood the world. A thoughtful pause could be meaningful. A calm moment could hold comfort. An evening spent together without endless conversation could still be filled with affection. As childhood slowly continued, many boys and girls became more comfortable with their own thoughts. They no longer searched constantly for entertainment. Instead, they watched birds building nests beneath rooflines. They observed clouds changing shape across wide skies. They noticed the shadows growing longer as the afternoon faded toward evening. These quiet observations became treasured companions. No reward waited for them. No praise was expected. The simple act of noticing became enough. Without realizing it, the children were building an inner world. A peaceful place where thoughts could settle gently. Where memories could rest. Where questions could wait patiently until the proper time. Outside, another day slowly drew toward its close. Workers returned home. Factory whistles fell silent. Shop doors closed one after another. The streets gradually emptied. The air cooled with the coming night. One by one, windows glowed with warm candlelight. Inside those homes, children finished their final chores. Books were returned to shelves. Shoes placed neatly by the door. Curtains drawn across the windows. The familiar evening routine unfolded almost without words. No one needed to announce each step. Everyone already knew. The house itself seemed to remember. And as darkness settled quietly across the town once again, another peaceful lesson slipped gently into young hearts. Silence was no longer something to endure. It had become something familiar. A trusted companion that walked beside them through ordinary mornings, quiet afternoons, and gentle evenings, shaping their childhood one calm day after another. As the months quietly passed into years, silence no longer felt like a visitor that entered the home from time to time. It became part of the house itself, as familiar as the front door, the staircase, or the old clock that faithfully counted each passing hour. Children who had once needed gentle reminders now found themselves moving through the day almost naturally. Their voices softened indoors. Their footsteps became lighter across polished wooden floors. Even the way they opened doors showed a quiet care that had grown through countless ordinary days. Much of this learning happened without anyone noticing. There was rarely a single afternoon when a parent suddenly declared that a child had mastered patience. Instead, the change arrived so slowly that it almost escaped attention. One winter evening, a mother might realize that her youngest daughter no longer interrupted conversations as often as she once had. A father might notice his son waiting calmly beside him while speaking with a neighbor. A teacher might look across a classroom and see children quietly beginning their work before being asked. These changes were small. Yet together they quietly shaped an entire childhood. The Victorian home itself encouraged this steady rhythm. Many houses were built with separate rooms for different purposes. The kitchen held the warmth of cooking fires. The sitting room welcomed family gatherings. The dining room remained carefully arranged for meals. Bedrooms waited upstairs beneath sloping roofs or high ceilings. Every room seemed to ask for its own kind of behavior. Children learned these differences naturally. The kitchen allowed gentle conversation while vegetables were chopped and bread was prepared. The sitting room invited reading, sewing, or quiet visiting. The bedroom welcomed whispering voices before sleep finally arrived. Even the sound of each room was different. The kitchen carried the soft clatter of dishes. The dining room echoed faintly beneath high ceilings. The sitting room held the muffled comfort of carpets and curtains. Bedrooms often felt wonderfully still. Children became familiar with these quiet differences long before they could explain them. Many mornings, sunlight entered through tall windows in long golden beams. Dust drifted slowly through the light. The tiny floating particles seemed almost suspended in time. A child dusting shelves might pause for only a moment to watch them rise and fall. Nothing hurried them. Nothing disturbed their peaceful dance. Soon the child returned to work. The moment passed quietly, becoming one more memory tucked gently into everyday life. Victorian adults often believed that good habits were built through repetition rather than excitement. If a child made the bed carefully every morning, neatness became natural. If shoes were polished every week, responsibility slowly followed. If books were returned to the shelf after reading, order quietly settled into daily routine. Silence worked in much the same way. It was practiced again and again. Not through punishment alone. More often through gentle expectation. The expectation itself became part of the atmosphere. Like the smell of fresh bread. Like the ticking clock. Like evening candlelight. Children breathed it in almost without noticing. During long afternoons, many mothers spent hours sewing. Needles moved steadily through cloth. Thread disappeared and reappeared with each careful stitch. Some daughters sat nearby learning the same patient movements. At first their stitches wandered unevenly across the fabric. The thread tightened too much. Then too little. Needle slipped from small fingers. Mistakes happened quietly. No one expected perfection immediately. Learning required patience. The room itself encouraged it. There was no hurry. Only steady practice beneath gentle afternoon light. Sometimes no one spoke for several minutes. The only sounds came from the soft pull of thread through fabric. The occasional turning of scissors. The quiet rustle of folded cloth. For children growing up in these homes, silence often became connected with learning rather than loneliness. A quiet room meant someone was concentrating. Someone was creating. Someone was thinking. Some boys learned similar lessons beside fathers or older craftsmen. A workbench stood near a bright window. Wood rested across sturdy supports. Small tools waited in careful order. Each tool had its purpose. Each movement required attention. A careless moment could spoil hours of careful work. Children quickly discovered that skilled hands rarely rushed. A carpenter measured twice before cutting once. A watchmaker paused before fitting tiny pieces together. A printer carefully arranged letters one by one. The greatest craftsmen often worked with remarkable calm. Young eyes noticed this. Without many words, they learned that steady hands often belong to quiet minds. Outside the home, gardens offered another peaceful classroom. Many Victorian families kept small gardens behind their houses. Some grew vegetables. Others planted flowers. Many grew both. Children were often asked to help. They carried watering cans across narrow paths. They loosened the soil around growing plants. They picked weeds before they spread. Gardening rewarded patience more than speed. Seeds disappeared beneath the earth for many days before anything appeared. Children learned to wait. No amount of wishing could hurry a flower into bloom. The seasons followed their own quiet schedule. Spring slowly awakened sleeping gardens. Tender green shoots pushed gently through dark soil. Summer filled the air with bees and blossoms. Autumn gathered ripe vegetables into baskets. Winter covered everything with peaceful rest. The garden never seemed impatient. Children gradually understood that life itself moved at its own gentle pace. Rainy days brought everyone indoors again. Drops tapped steadily against windows for hours. The streets outside grew shiny beneath the falling rain. Umbrellas drifted quietly past the glass. Inside, the house felt especially warm. Books appeared from shelves. Needlework returned. Letters were written. Children sometimes sat beside windows watching tiny rivers of rainwater slide down the glass. Each droplet joined another. Then another. Together they found their way toward the windowsill. The simple movement could hold a child's attention for surprisingly long moments. Quiet observation became its own pleasant pastime. Not every hour needed to be filled with activity. Victorian childhood often allowed space for watching, listening, thinking, waiting. Even illness, which visited nearly every family from time to time, carried its own lessons about silence. A sick room remained especially calm. Curtains softened the daylight. Footsteps became lighter. Doors closed gently. Voices dropped to little more than whispers. Children visiting an ill parent or grandparent quickly understood the change. The house itself seemed to breathe more slowly. Care was shown through quietness. A cool cloth placed carefully upon a forehead. A cup of warm broth carried steadily across the room. A chair pulled close beside the bed. Sometimes words offered comfort. Sometimes simple presence was enough. Children witnessed these gentle acts. They remembered them. Years later, many would care for others in the very same quiet way. Sunday mornings carried their own peaceful rhythm. Families dressed carefully in their best clothing. Buttons were checked once more. Boots shined softly beneath the morning light. The streets filled with neighbors walking in the same direction. Church bells echoed across rooftops. The sound traveled through cool morning air with remarkable clarity. Inside the church, silence held a different meaning. It became a sign of reflection. People bowed their heads. Sunlight filtered through colored windows. Dust floated lazily through narrow beams of light. The minister's voice rose gently beneath the high ceiling. Children listened. They watched older family members. They copied their quiet posture. Many of them remembered these peaceful mornings throughout their lives. Afterward, families often returned home together. Dinner was prepared. The afternoon unfolded slowly. Some people rested. Others read quietly. The pace of the day remained gentle. There was no need to hurry. The week would begin again soon enough. As children grew into older boys and girls, they gradually became trusted with greater responsibilities. An older sister might help care for younger brothers and sisters. She learned to quiet a crying baby by rocking gently rather than speaking loudly. She discovered that soft humming often worked better than hurried words. An older brother might escort younger children safely across busy streets. He watched carefully before crossing. He waited patiently. His calm behavior became an example for those following behind. Responsibility itself often encouraged quiet confidence. Children who cared for others discovered that steady voices brought reassurance. Panic rarely solved problems. Calmness often did. These were lessons learned through ordinary experience. Not dramatic events. Simply one day after another. The changing weather continued, marking the passage of time. Spring mornings carried birdsong through open windows. Summer evenings lingered beneath golden skies. Autumn winds gathered leaves into quiet corners. Winter fires glowed softly against dark nights. The children changed with the seasons. They grew taller. Their clothing was replaced with larger sizes. Books became more difficult. Responsibilities became greater. Yet the quiet habits learned in childhood remained close beside them. Some evenings, after the day's work had ended, a child sat alone beside a window. Outside, gas lamps flickered to life along the street. Their warm glow reflected upon damp stones after a light rain. A horse passed slowly beneath the window. Its steady footsteps faded into the distance. The child rested a book upon folded hands and simply watched the evening arrive. There was no urgent need to do anything else. The quiet itself felt complete. Thoughts wandered gently. Perhaps tomorrow's lessons came to mind. Perhaps memories of a summer picnic returned for a moment. Perhaps nothing in particular filled the child's thoughts at all. The silence welcomed every possibility. Hour by hour, day by day, and season after season, Victorian children slowly discovered that quietness was not always an empty place. Sometimes it became a place where understanding quietly grew. Where patience settled deep inside the heart. Where ordinary moments revealed their gentle beauty. Without realizing it, they were learning that some of life's most lasting lessons arrived without loud voices, without hurried movements, and without grand announcements. They arrived softly, like morning light entering through old glass windows. They arrived steadily, like the faithful ticking of the family clock. And they remained, quietly shaping childhood long after the sound of each ordinary day had gently faded into the peaceful evening. As another season quietly settled over the towns and villages of Victorian Britain, the children who had once been guided by constant reminders now carried many of those lessons within themselves. Their days still followed familiar patterns. Morning arrived. Work began. Lessons continued. Evening returned. Sleep came gently at the close of another ordinary day. The rhythm rarely changed very quickly. There was comfort in knowing what tomorrow would probably bring. For a child, predictability could feel as reassuring as a warm blanket on a cold evening. The old clock downstairs marked another hour. Its hands moved so slowly that no one noticed them from one moment to the next. Yet by sunset they had quietly traveled across the face of the clock. Victorian childhood often unfolded in much the same way. Growth was difficult to notice while it was happening. Only after many months did parents suddenly realize how much their children had changed. A coat that fit perfectly the previous winter now seemed too short. Shoes felt tight. A favorite chair looked smaller. Voices sounded slightly deeper. Faces appeared a little older. The quiet habits of childhood grew in exactly the same manner. They arrived one ordinary day at a time. Many afternoons were spent completing lessons at home after school had ended. Books rested upon polished tables near bright windows. Natural light was precious before evening arrived. Children learned to make good use of it. They carefully copied passages from readers into neat copybooks. Ink dried slowly upon the page. Each letter demanded careful attention. There was no space for rushing. A hurried hand often left smudges across the paper. Teachers noticed such things. Parents noticed them too. So children slowed their movements. Their breathing settled. Their hands became steadier. The room itself encouraged quiet concentration. Outside the window, life continued gently. A woman crossed the street carrying a basket. Two men greeted one another before continuing toward their work. A dog wandered lazily along the edge of the road. Smoke drifted upward from nearby chimneys. Everything seemed to move with patient purpose. Sometimes a child paused while writing. Not because the lesson was difficult. Simply because the sounds outside invited quiet attention. A pigeon landed upon the garden fence. Its feathers shimmered softly beneath the afternoon sun. Another bird answered from a nearby rooftop. The wind carried the scent of damp earth after an early rain. Small moments like these often became peaceful interruptions. No one would have called them important. Yet they quietly remained in memory. Victorian homes often contained many objects that asked to be treated with care. China dishes rested safely inside cabinets. Glass lamps stood upon side tables. Framed family portraits hung carefully upon the walls. Heavy books filled wooden shelves. Children were reminded to move thoughtfully among these belongings. Running indoors was discouraged. Quick movements could easily lead to broken things. So children learned to slow themselves. A hand reached gently for a teacup. A chair was returned quietly beneath the table. A door was closed without slamming. These actions became almost automatic. The house itself seemed grateful for careful hands. Older children often helped younger brothers and sisters with simple lessons. Reading aloud became one of these quiet responsibilities. A 12-year-old might sit beside a 6-year-old near the fireplace. A small book rested open between them. The older child read slowly, allowing each word to settle clearly. The younger child listened carefully. sometimes repeating difficult words, sometimes smiling with quiet pride after finally reading a sentence alone. There was patience in these moments. Learning rarely happened all at once. It unfolded gently, much like childhood itself. The older child discovered another lesson during these afternoons. Teaching required calmness. Speaking too quickly only caused confusion. Gentle encouragement often worked better than correction alone. Without realizing it, many children practiced kindness through these peaceful routines. The family kitchen remained one of the busiest places in the house. Morning, afternoon, and evening all passed through its doors. Fresh vegetables waited upon wooden tables. Potatoes were peeled slowly into waiting bowls. Carrots were scrubbed clean. Loaves of bread cooled beneath folded cloths. Soup simmered gently over the fire. Children helping with meals learned to work together without creating unnecessary noise. One stirred the pot. Another arranged plates. Someone carried water. Someone swept the floor afterward. Each person understood their small part. The work flowed quietly from one pair of hands to another. Even the sounds of cooking became comforting. The steady chopping of vegetables. The soft bubbling of soup. The gentle clink of spoons against bowls. The crackle of the fire beneath the kettle. These sounds belonged to home. They welcomed children every day. As evening approached, daylight slowly slipped away from the windows. The golden light became softer. Long shadows stretched across wooden floors. Curtains were drawn against the cooling air. Soon candles appeared once more. Lighting them became an evening ritual repeated thousands of times throughout childhood. One candle illuminated another. Small flames awakened quietly around the room. Their light never reached every corner. Instead, gentle shadows remained. Children often found those shadows strangely comforting. The familiar furniture looked softer beneath candlelight. The room invited calm voices. Books appeared warmer. The fire glowed brighter. Night settled naturally around the family. During these evenings, conversation often slowed. After a long day of work, people had fewer words. Not because affection had disappeared. Simply because tiredness had arrived. Hands rested. Feet relaxed beside the fire. Children noticed this quiet weariness. They understood it long before they became adults themselves. Many fathers returned home carrying the weight of long hours. Some worked in offices. Others in workshops. Some in factories. Others outdoors. Whatever their occupation, the day had demanded steady effort. Children greeted them politely. The household adjusted to the evening pace. A warm meal. A little conversation. Then long stretches of peaceful silence shared together. For many families, this quiet companionship became one of the deepest expressions of belonging. No one needed constant conversation to know they were together. The fire spoke softly enough for everyone. Winter evenings made these moments even more noticeable. Rain sometimes beat steadily against the windows. Wind circled around chimneys with a low gentle sound. Inside, blankets covered knees. Tea warmed waiting hands. A cat stretched comfortably near the hearth. Children read. Adults sewed. Someone occasionally turned the page of a newspaper. The sounds were few. The comfort was great. Some children secretly enjoyed these evenings more than busy celebrations. There was something peaceful about ordinary nights. Nothing unusual happened. Nothing remarkable was expected. The family simply remained together. Many years later, those ordinary evenings would become some of the clearest memories they carried into adulthood. School holidays offered a slightly different rhythm. Lessons paused for a little while, but discipline rarely disappeared entirely. Children still woke at sensible hours. They still helped around the house. They still spoke respectfully. Yet the slower pace allowed more quiet wandering. Some walked through nearby fields. Others visited parks or village greens. A child might sit beneath a broad tree with a favorite book. After reading for a while, the book quietly closed. Attention shifted toward the world itself. Clouds drifted overhead. Leaves whispered together in the breeze. Insects moved patiently among tall grasses. Time seemed wonderfully unhurried. There was no need to rush home immediately. The afternoon welcomed slow observation. Some boys enjoyed skipping smooth stones across ponds. Some girls gathered wildflowers along country paths. Others simply walked together, speaking only now and then. Silence no longer felt awkward. Friendship itself had learned to rest comfortably within quiet moments. As dusk approached, birds gradually settled into the trees. Their songs became fewer. The evening air cooled gently. The first stars appeared above the rooftops. Families made their way home. Windows glowed with warm candlelight waiting inside. Another familiar evening quietly unfolded. Children washed their hands. The supper table welcomed everyone. Afterward came reading, needlework, mending clothes, preparing for tomorrow. Every action carried the calm confidence of repetition. Nothing felt hurried. Nothing felt uncertain. Life moved at the measured pace that generations before them had known. As bedtime drew near, children climbed the staircase carrying candles that cast small circles of light before them. The wooden banister felt smooth beneath their hands after years of use. Floorboards remembered countless footsteps. Doors opened softly. Bedrooms welcomed the peaceful close of another ordinary day. Outside, the streets gradually emptied. The last carriage rolled into the distance. A church bell quietly announced the passing hour. The wind gently touched rooftops before continuing into the sleeping countryside. Inside those quiet rooms, children settled beneath heavy blankets. The day's lessons slowly drifted through their thoughts. Not only the lessons from books, but the quieter lessons that no textbook ever described. The patience of waiting. The comfort of routine. The kindness found in gentle voices. The strength hidden inside calm hands. The peaceful confidence that grew from listening before speaking. These lessons rested quietly beside them as sleep slowly approached. Without realizing it, they were becoming part of who they would one day be. Not through great speeches. Not through extraordinary events. But through thousands of simple days filled with candlelight, careful work, soft footsteps, warm kitchens, familiar clocks, and the quiet, steady rhythm of a Victorian childhood that asked them, gently and patiently, to discover the quiet strength that could be found in silence itself. The passing years rarely announced themselves. They arrived quietly, much like the first light of dawn slipping through a bedroom curtain. One morning looked very much like the one before it. The same church bell welcomed the hour. The same kettle warmed above the fire. The same narrow street slowly filled with neighbors beginning another ordinary day. Yet beneath these familiar routines, childhood continued its gentle work. The little boy who once struggled to button his own coat now fastened it without thinking. The young girl who had carefully traced each letter of the alphabet now filled entire pages with smooth handwriting. The changes were almost invisible while they happened. Only time could reveal them. Silence, too, continued its patient teaching. By now, Many children no longer thought of quietness as something adults required. It had become part of the way they experienced the world. They noticed things that hurried people often overlooked. The sound of rain beginning before anyone saw the clouds. The smell of fresh bread drifting through an open window long before breakfast was served. The tiny crack made by cooling iron on the stove after supper. The soft flutter of pigeons lifting together from a rooftop. Their days were filled with these small observations. Morning often began with familiar household duties. Before lessons or errands, there was always something waiting to be done. Coal needed carrying from the shed. Water had to be brought inside. Ashes from yesterday's fire were carefully cleared away. Curtains were opened to welcome the daylight. Windows sometimes needed wiping after damp nights left thin patterns of moisture across the glass. Children learned that every home depended upon many quiet acts. No single task seemed especially important by itself. Yet together they allowed the household to move smoothly from morning until night. There was satisfaction in completing these duties well. Not because someone always offered praise. Often no one said very much at all. A mother might simply nod. A father might glance toward neatly finished work before continuing with his own responsibilities. The acknowledgement was gentle. It was enough. Many Victorian children grew comfortable with this quiet form of encouragement. Not every accomplishment needed applause. Sometimes doing the task properly was its own reward. Outside, the streets carried their own familiar rhythm. The cobblestones still held the coolness of early morning. A horse's hooves echoed steadily between rows of brick buildings. Shopkeepers raised wooden shutters one by one. A newspaper boy hurried past with folded papers beneath his arm. The smell of fresh coal smoke mixed with the scent of baking bread from nearby ovens. Children walking through these streets came to know every corner, every doorway, every old tree, every iron fence that bordered a garden. Their world felt carefully arranged. It offered few surprises, but many comforts. Even the weather became an old friend. They learned how fog settled across certain streets before sunrise. How autumn winds always gathered leaves against the same stone walls. How winter frost quietly decorated the lower edges of windows. How spring filled the gardens with birds returning after long months away. These changes happened faithfully every year. Children waited for them without impatience. The seasons kept their promises. School continued to shape each passing week. The classroom remained much as it always had. Wooden desks stood in careful rows. The blackboard carried neat lines of writing. Sunlight traveled slowly across the room as the hours passed. Lessons required steady attention. Reading aloud. Writing neatly. Solving arithmetic problems one careful step at a time. Children who had once found sitting still difficult now did so almost naturally. They folded their hands while listening. They waited before answering questions. When another student spoke, they listened respectfully. These habits had become second nature. Teachers noticed such children. Not because they were loud. Quite the opposite. Their calm presence quietly filled the room. Sometimes a younger student grew restless. A foot tapped against the floor. A pencil rolled off the desk. Eyes wandered toward the windows where birds seemed far more interesting than multiplication tables. Older children often smiled inwardly. They remembered feeling exactly the same not so many years before. Growing older brought a gentle understanding. Patience could not be rushed. Every child learned at a different pace. The walk home after school offered another peaceful part of the day. Books rested beneath one arm. The afternoon sun warmed brick walls. Laundry fluttered gently between neighboring houses. Garden gates stood open. Some families trimmed hedges while others swept their front steps. Children greeted familiar faces as they passed. The town itself seemed to know them. An elderly shopkeeper nodded kindly. A baker smiled while arranging fresh loaves. A postman continued along his route with quiet determination. Life unfolded steadily around them. When they reached home, another series of ordinary tasks quietly waited. School clothes were brushed clean. Books returned to their proper places. Hands washed before helping prepare the evening meal. Responsibility had become woven into the fabric of each day. No one announced these moments as important. Yet they quietly built dependable character. The kitchen remained the warm heart of many homes. As afternoon faded toward evening, its comforting sounds returned once more. A knife moved steadily across a chopping board. Bread was sliced carefully. Vegetables simmered gently in heavy pots. The smell of onions, herbs, and fresh broth slowly filled the rooms. Children helped without needing many instructions. One carried clean plates to the table. Another polished cutlery with a soft cloth. Someone folded napkins. Someone fetched extra firewood. The work passed smoothly from one person to another. Conversation came quietly when needed. Silence comfortably filled the spaces between. After supper, the dishes were washed together. Warm water steamed gently into the cool evening air. Plates clinked softly. Towels dried each piece before returning it neatly to the cupboard. Many hands made light work. Children discovered that shared silence could feel deeply companionable. Everyone understood the task. Everyone understood their place within it. As daylight faded, lamps and candles slowly transformed the house. Dark corners softened. Golden light rested upon polished tables and framed pictures. The windows became mirrors, reflecting the peaceful rooms instead of the darkening streets outside. Children often paused for a moment before the curtains. They could just make out the faint outline of neighboring homes beneath the evening sky. One by one, other windows glowed with candlelight too. Entire streets seemed to breathe together as families settled indoors. It was comforting to imagine similar evenings unfolding behind every window. Other children reading beside other fires. Other parents quietly ending another day's work. Other clocks faithfully measuring the passing hours. The whole neighborhood seemed connected through these simple routines. Books remained trusted companions during these quiet evenings. Some children preferred adventure stories. Others enjoyed histories, poems, or collections of nature writings. Whatever the subject, reading invited stillness. The turning of each page slowed the rhythm of the evening even further. Words settled gently into thoughtful minds. Sometimes a child stopped reading altogether. The book rested quietly upon their lap. Their attention drifted toward the fire. The glowing coals shifted almost silently beneath a covering of white ash. Tiny sparks appeared for only a moment before disappearing again. There was no need to hurry back to the story. The pause itself became part of the evening. Older relatives often appreciated these peaceful moments. A grandmother might continue knitting without looking down. Years of practice allowed her hands to remember every movement. A grandfather carefully wound the family clock each evening at nearly the same time. The small key turned with quiet precision. The familiar ticking continued, steady and dependable. Children watched these rituals many times. Eventually they could almost predict them. The same actions. The same gentle pace. The same comforting order. They began to understand that routines were not simply habits. They were threads that quietly held family life together. When one evening resembled another, people felt secure. Home became a place where tomorrow could be trusted. As bedtime approached, younger children sometimes grew sleepy before they admitted it. Their eyes lingered on the pages of a book. Their heads rested lightly against a parent's shoulder. The fire's warmth filled the room. The quiet conversation of adults blended with the soft ticking of the clock. Sleep drew nearer with each passing minute. Eventually, a gentle voice suggested it was time for bed. No one hurried. Books were carefully closed. Candles lifted from their holders. Small shadows moved slowly across the walls as children climbed the stairs. The staircase had carried them thousands of times before. Each step creaked in its own familiar way. They knew exactly which boards sang the loudest beneath their feet. The sounds themselves felt almost friendly. At the bedroom door, the house grew quieter still. Night wrapped itself around the rooftops outside. The wind whispered gently along the chimney. Somewhere far away, the faint sound of a late carriage drifted through the darkness before fading completely. Children settled beneath thick blankets. The mattress welcomed their tired bodies after another full day. Their thoughts wandered slowly through familiar memories. The walk to school. The afternoon chores. The smell of bread in the kitchen. The comforting warmth of the fire. The quiet company of family gathered together beneath candlelight. Nothing remarkable had happened. No great adventure had interrupted the day. Yet it had been full. Full of gentle routines. Full of patient work. Full of quiet moments that asked for nothing except attention. As sleep slowly approached, the silence around them no longer felt empty. It felt like an old friend. A faithful companion that had walked beside them through every ordinary morning, every peaceful afternoon, and every calm evening, quietly shaping their hearts one unhurried day at a time. With each passing season, the children who had once watched the adults with curious eyes slowly became the older children that younger brothers and sisters began to watch. The change happened so gently that it was almost impossible to notice. One day a little hand reached for theirs while crossing the street. One evening a younger child asked them to read a favorite story before bed. Without thinking very much about it, they had become examples. The lessons they had quietly gathered over many years now began to pass naturally to someone else. A Victorian household was often filled with these quiet exchanges. No formal lesson was announced. No great speech was given. Instead, children learned by seeing. A younger sister watched an older sister carefully fold clean linen. An older brother showed a younger one how to polish boots until the leather caught the light from the window. A cousin demonstrated how to set the dining table so that every plate and spoon rested neatly in its proper place. These moments lasted only a few minutes. Yet they were repeated hundreds of times over the course of childhood. The repetition made them lasting. Morning sunlight often entered the house before anyone spoke very much. It stretched slowly across polished wooden floors, climbed the legs of sturdy tables, and rested softly against whitewashed walls. Dust drifted peacefully through the bright air. The house itself seemed to wake gently. A child carrying fresh water upstairs moved carefully so that none spilled across the steps. Another quietly opened the bedroom curtains. Fresh air entered the room. The cool morning breeze carried the distant sounds of birds welcoming the day. Church bells echoed faintly across the rooftops. Somewhere nearby, a rooster called from a small yard hidden behind neighboring houses. These familiar sounds greeted children almost every morning. They became part of the invisible fabric of daily life. Children rarely paused to think about them while they were young. Only many years later might they remember how comforting those ordinary sounds had been. Breakfast brought everyone together once more. Warm porridge rested in heavy bowls. Fresh bread was sliced thickly. Butter softened slowly near the warmth of the stove. Tea filled simple cups. The family gathered around the table with sleepy smiles and quiet greetings. There was no need for constant conversation. Everyone already understood one another. Sometimes silence itself carried a feeling of closeness. Parents often looked across the table with quiet satisfaction. The children were growing. Not only taller, not only stronger, but steadier. A child who once fidgeted endlessly now sat comfortably through the meal. Another who had hurried through every task now completed chores with thoughtful care. Growth revealed itself through little habits. These were the changes that pleased adults most deeply. After breakfast, the house separated into its familiar paths. Some children prepared for school. Others remained home to help with household duties. Parents left for work. Servants, where households employed them, quietly continued their responsibilities. Every person understood the rhythm of the day. There was comfort in knowing where one belonged. The streets outside reflected the same gentle order. Market stalls slowly filled with vegetables, fruit, bread, and flowers. Shopkeepers arranged goods carefully behind clean windows. Customers greeted one another politely. Deliveries arrived by horse and cart. Nothing happened especially quickly. The pace of life allowed people to notice one another. Children walking through these streets learned to recognize familiar faces. The woman who always sold flowers near the church gate. The old cobbler whose tiny shop smelled of polished leather. The postman who tipped his hat each morning. The elderly gentleman who walked slowly with a cane, never appearing to hurry. These ordinary people quietly became part of childhood. Without speaking very often, they contributed to the comforting feeling that every neighborhood carried its own familiar heart. At school, the older children found themselves helping those who struggled. A younger student might lose their place while reading aloud. Instead of laughing, an older child quietly pointed to the correct line. Someone else might forget how to solve an arithmetic problem. A patient explanation often followed. Teachers appreciated these moments. They believed good character revealed itself through gentle conduct. Children learned that kindness did not need loud praise. Often it passed almost unnoticed. A hand offering assistance. A quiet word of encouragement. A shared smile after a difficult lesson was finally understood. These small acts gradually became part of everyday life. As afternoon arrived, sunlight filled the classrooms with a warm golden glow. Outside, leaves stirred gently in the breeze. The shadows of tree branches moved slowly across the schoolyard. Sometimes children looked through the windows for only a brief moment before returning to their work. Even those short pauses carried a quiet beauty. The changing seasons continued to mark the years. Spring arrived with blossoms that seemed almost too delicate to last. Apple trees filled the air with pale petals. Children watched them drift softly to the ground whenever the wind passed through. The petals rested upon paths like tiny pieces of white silk. No one could stop them from falling. No one hurried their arrival. Nature followed its own peaceful rhythm. Summer filled gardens with color. Roses climbed old brick walls. Lavender attracted bees that moved patiently from flower to flower. Children helping in the garden learned to recognize familiar scents. Fresh mint crushed beneath careful fingers. The rich smell of damp earth after watering the vegetables. The sweetness of blooming honeysuckle near wooden fences. Gardens offered quiet lessons that books could never teach. Plants asked for steady attention. Not constant attention. A garden could not be forced to grow overnight. Children watered carefully, pulled weeds patiently, waited faithfully. The rewards arrived slowly. Autumn brought longer evenings. The sunlight faded earlier each day. Families gathered indoors while rain tapped gently against the windows. Books became trusted companions once again. Candles glowed warmly upon polished tables. The fire welcomed everyone back into the sitting room. Children often completed schoolwork beside the fireplace while adults continued sewing, mending, or reading. Nobody seemed troubled by the peaceful silence that settled over the room. It had become familiar, almost comforting. Sometimes a log shifted in the fire with a soft crack. A page turned quietly. Someone poured another cup of tea. The clock continued measuring time without complaint. Tick, tick, tick. Its steady rhythm reminded everyone that evening was slowly giving way to night. Winter returned with frost decorating the edges of windows. Children woke to find delicate patterns spread across the glass. Each one looked different. Tiny branches of ice stretched in graceful designs across the surface. Many children stood quietly for a moment before touching the cold window with curious fingers. Outside, rooftops wore thin blankets of snow. Smoke drifted peacefully upward from chimneys. The whole neighborhood appeared softer beneath the winter sky. Inside, heavy curtains kept warmth close. Blankets covered chairs. The smell of burning coal mixed gently with baking bread. Families spent longer evenings together. Conversation remained gentle. Laughter appeared now and then but never lingered loudly. The house welcomed peaceful voices. Children gradually understood something important during these winter nights. Silence was not the opposite of happiness. Many of their happiest memories arrived in quiet rooms. A parent reading beside the fire. A grandparent smiling while knitting. Brothers and sisters sharing a storybook beneath a single lamp. The simple warmth of everyone remaining together while the wind whispered outside. These moments asked for nothing extraordinary. They were complete just as they were. As the children grew older, they also became more aware of the feelings of others. A younger sibling frightened by a thunderstorm. An elderly neighbor moving more slowly than before. A mother tired after a long day's work. A father sitting quietly after many hours of labor. Silence taught observation. Observation often led to compassion. The child who noticed these things learned to respond gently. Perhaps by finishing an extra chore without being asked. Perhaps by speaking more softly. Perhaps by simply sitting beside someone who seemed weary. Kindness often arrived without many words. The house itself seemed to recognize these quiet acts. Evening settled once again over the familiar streets. One by one, lamps glowed behind curtains. The day's final carriage rolled slowly past rows of sleeping homes. A cool breeze carried the scent of damp stone after a light rain. Above the rooftops, the stars quietly appeared. The children climbed the stairs toward their bedrooms. Each step carried memories from countless evenings before. Hands brushed the polished banister. Candles flickered gently. The familiar hallway welcomed them home once again. Before sleep, many paused beside the bedroom window for just a moment. The town rested peacefully beneath the night sky. Noisy work had ended. Markets were closed. Factories stood silent until morning. Only the occasional distant hoofbeat disturbed the stillness before fading away. It was a quiet world. Not empty. Simply resting. And within that peaceful stillness, another ordinary day gently came to an end, leaving behind another small collection of patient habits, thoughtful observations, and silent lessons that would continue shaping young hearts as the years moved softly onward. The years continued to pass with remarkable gentleness. No single morning announced that childhood was changing. No church bell rang differently. No familiar street suddenly looked new. Instead, the changes arrived in quiet ways, hidden inside ordinary routines that had become as dependable as the sunrise itself. The children who had once looked upward to every adult for guidance now found that many decisions rested gently in their own hands. A parent no longer needed to remind them to straighten the blankets after waking. The bedroom was already tidy before anyone came upstairs. School books were packed the evening before. Boots stood neatly beside the door, polished until they reflected the morning light. These small acts revealed something important. Discipline had slowly become habit. Habit had quietly become character. The house itself seemed to appreciate this gentle order. Morning sunlight entered through lace curtains, painting soft patterns across the floorboards. The old clock downstairs greeted another day with its familiar ticking. Its steady voice had accompanied these children since they could barely remember. When they were very young, they had listened to it while learning their letters. Later, they had heard it while practicing handwriting, reading stories, or helping with evening chores. Now they scarcely noticed it at all. Yet if the clock ever stopped, the whole house seemed strangely different. Silence itself had many forms. There was the peaceful silence of contentment, the thoughtful silence of learning, the respectful silence shared during prayer, the restful silence that settled after supper. Children slowly learned to recognize each one without anyone needing to explain the difference. On some mornings, fog rested heavily over the town. The rooftops disappeared into a pale gray sky. Trees became gentle shadows. Even familiar streets looked mysterious beneath the drifting mist. Children wrapped scarves around their necks before stepping outside. Their breath appeared in little white clouds as they walked toward school. The world seemed wonderfully quiet. The fog softened every sound. Horse hooves echoed more gently. Voices carried only a short distance. Even the wheels of passing carts seemed quieter than usual. Many children found these mornings strangely comforting. The familiar town had not disappeared. It was simply resting beneath a soft blanket of mist. Walking through it encouraged slower steps. There was little reason to hurry. Each familiar building gradually appeared as they approached, then quietly disappeared again behind them. The journey itself became peaceful. School remained an important part of growing up. By now, many of the older children had earned the trust of their teachers. They distributed books before lessons began. They erased the blackboard after class. Sometimes they helped younger pupils organize their desks before everyone returned home. These responsibilities were rarely dramatic. Yet they quietly reminded children that trust was earned through dependable actions rather than loud promises. Teachers often valued the calm student who completed every task with care. Such children rarely drew attention to themselves. Yet they became the steady center of the classroom. Others naturally followed their example. Not because they were commanded to do so. Simply because quiet confidence often inspired more effectively than loud instruction. During writing lessons, the classroom settled into almost complete stillness. Only the gentle scratching of pen nibs across paper filled the room. Sunlight rested upon rows of copy books. Ink bottles reflected small circles of light. Occasionally someone paused to dip a pen into fresh ink before continuing once again. The rhythm was almost musical. Scratch. Pause. Dip. Scratch again. Children became so familiar with these sounds that they scarcely noticed them. Yet years later, many would remember them with surprising clarity. Memory often chooses quiet moments to preserve. At midday, the schoolyard welcomed children into fresh air. Groups gathered beneath old trees. Some shared simple lunches wrapped in cloth. Others wandered slowly around the yard while talking in gentle voices. There was laughter, certainly. Children have always laughed. But even their happiest moments often settled naturally back into calm conversation. Friendships deepened through countless ordinary afternoons. Many children discovered that their closest companions were not always the loudest. Sometimes friendship grew strongest beside someone who enjoyed peaceful walks home after school. Someone comfortable sharing both conversation and silence. The journey home often followed familiar streets lined with brick houses and small gardens. Window boxes overflowed with flowers during spring and summer. Cats rested lazily upon sunny walls. Laundry fluttered quietly between neighboring yards. An elderly gardener might pause from trimming hedges to offer a friendly nod. A blackbird sang from the highest branch of an apple tree. The neighborhood felt wonderfully alive without ever seeming hurried. Home welcomed them once more. The smell of supper already drifted through the hallway. Fresh herbs simmered gently in soup. Bread cooled upon the kitchen table. Someone stirred a heavy pot over the fire. Another family member peeled apples for a pie. Children entered this familiar scene almost without thinking. Coats were hung. Hands were washed. Books placed carefully upon shelves. Soon everyone quietly found their place within the evening routine. Some children carried wood for the fire. Others polished lamps before darkness settled outside. One carefully folded freshly dried washing. Another helped set the table. These chores had become almost peaceful through repetition. The hands worked while the mind wandered gently. Sometimes a child quietly remembered a story read earlier that day. Sometimes they planned tomorrow's lessons. Sometimes they simply listened to the sounds of home. The steady bubbling of soup. The soft brushing of a broom across the floor. The gentle movement of chairs around the table. Every sound belonged. Every sound felt familiar. As twilight approached, the colors outside slowly changed. The bright blue afternoon sky softened into gentle shades of gold and lavender. Long shadows stretched across gardens. Birdsong gradually became quieter as evening settled over the town. Children sometimes paused beside the back door just to watch daylight slowly fade. There was beauty in watching something happen gradually. Victorian childhood allowed room for these quiet observations. No one expected every minute to be productive. Sometimes simply noticing the world was enough. After the evening meal, many families gathered in the sitting room. This was perhaps the quietest part of the entire day. The fire burned steadily. Candles rested upon polished tables. The curtains were closed against the darkness outside. Each family member found a familiar place. A father opened a newspaper. A mother continued mending clothes. An older sister embroidered delicate flowers onto a piece of linen. A younger brother carefully assembled a small puzzle. Someone read a chapter from a favorite book. Someone else simply watched the flames. Conversation drifted gently through the room whenever it felt natural. Then silence returned once more. No one seemed eager to chase it away. The silence belonged there. It rested comfortably among them. Children learned another lesson during these evenings. Not every quiet moment required thought. Sometimes the mind simply rested. Eyes followed the dancing firelight across the ceiling. Thoughts slowed naturally. The day's worries became smaller. Tomorrow would arrive soon enough. For now, there was only the warmth of the room, the steady ticking of the clock, and the peaceful company of family. Grandparents, when present, often seemed especially comfortable within these calm evenings. Years of experience had taught them not to rush through ordinary moments. A grandfather might polish his spectacles before opening a well-loved book. A grandmother folded finished knitting with careful hands before beginning another row. Their movements carried remarkable patience. Children noticed. Not because anyone pointed it out. Simply because quiet actions often draw gentle attention. Watching older generations move through familiar routines showed children that peace could remain throughout life. Growing older did not always mean growing louder. Sometimes it meant growing calmer. Outside, rain occasionally began after nightfall. The first drops tapped softly against the windows. Soon a steady rhythm filled the air. The fire answered with its own quiet crackling. The two sounds blended together beautifully. Rain. Fire. Clock. Breathing. These simple rhythms surrounded countless Victorian evenings. Many children fell asleep hearing them. By bedtime, the house had grown wonderfully still. Candles were carried upstairs one by one. Doors closed gently. Blankets were turned down. Night clothes were neatly folded nearby for the morning. Children slipped beneath heavy quilts that still held a little warmth from the fire below. Before closing their eyes, some looked toward the window. Moonlight rested softly upon the glass. The rooftops outside appeared peaceful beneath the stars. Somewhere far away, a church clock quietly marked another passing hour. Its sound drifted across the sleeping town before disappearing into the night. Within that peaceful darkness, another ordinary day became part of memory. It would never be written into history books. No monument would remember it. No grand painting would preserve it. Yet it mattered deeply. Because childhood is often shaped far more by ordinary evenings than by extraordinary days. It is shaped by familiar voices, careful hands, patient routines, warm kitchens, quiet classrooms, and peaceful nights where silence slowly teaches the heart to feel at home with itself. And so, beneath the gentle glow of fading candlelight, another Victorian child closed weary eyes, breathed slowly, and drifted into restful sleep, carrying one more quiet lesson into the morning that was patiently waiting just beyond the dawn. Before long, another gentle morning unfolded across the quiet neighborhoods where Victorian families began their day much as they always had. The first light appeared softly behind rows of chimneys. Its pale glow slowly climbed over slate rooftops and settled upon narrow streets that still belonged to the silence of dawn. The town seemed to breathe very slowly before the familiar sounds of work returned. A thin ribbon of smoke rose from one chimney. Then another. Soon the air carried the comforting scent of coal fires waking after the long night. Children opened their eyes to another ordinary day. For many of them, there was comfort in knowing exactly what would happen next. The blankets would be folded. The wash basin would wait upon its stand. Cold water would splash against sleepy faces. Boots would be pulled on. Hair would be brushed. The morning would quietly continue, just as it had yesterday and the day before that. Routine offered a gentle kind of security. Nothing surprising waited behind the bedroom door. Only another peaceful beginning. Some children shared their rooms with brothers or sisters. The first one awake often tried not to disturb the others. They dressed carefully. Buttons were fastened slowly. Drawers opened with quiet hands. Even these little efforts reflected years of learning to think about those nearby. Consideration had become almost instinctive. As they descended the staircase, they noticed familiar things without truly trying. The smooth wooden rail beneath their fingers. The place where one step always creaked a little louder than the rest. The soft morning light filtering through the stairwell window. These details had surrounded them since they were very young. They were as much a part of home as the walls themselves. Downstairs, the kitchen already carried signs of life. The kettle whispered gently above the fire. Fresh bread waited beneath a folded cloth. Someone stirred porridge with slow, steady movements. The room felt warm against the coolness of the morning air. Children entered quietly. Good mornings were exchanged in gentle voices. The day did not need loud beginnings. Outside, dew rested upon garden leaves. Tiny drops of water reflected the growing sunlight like little pieces of glass. A robin landed upon the garden fence. It tilted its head for a moment before hopping into the grass. Children often paused to watch these small visitors while finishing breakfast. The natural world always seemed busy without appearing rushed. Birds gathered twigs one careful trip at a time. Bees visited flowers patiently. Clouds crossed the sky at their own unhurried pace. Nature offered its own quiet lessons every single day. The walk to school remained one of childhood's simplest pleasures. Although the journey followed the same streets each morning, it never felt exactly the same. One day sunlight filled every corner. Another day rain left tiny puddles shining between the cobblestones. Sometimes a gentle breeze carried the scent of nearby gardens. Other mornings brought cool fog that wrapped every building in soft gray light. Children noticed these changes almost without thinking. Observation had become one of their oldest habits. As they walked, they greeted familiar faces. The baker arranged warm loaves inside the window. The blacksmith had already begun his work. His steady hammer echoed through the quiet morning air. Milk wagons rolled slowly from house to house. The postman continued along his route with calm determination. Every person seemed to belong to the rhythm of the town. Children found comfort in seeing the same people living their ordinary lives. Inside the classroom, another day of lessons quietly unfolded. The teacher greeted each student with calm dignity. Books were opened. Pens prepared. Lessons began. The older students had grown remarkably dependable. Many no longer waited to be told every small task. If a window needed opening, someone quietly stepped forward. If extra books needed passing along the rows, willing hands were already reaching. These simple acts reflected something deeper than obedience. They showed awareness. Children had learned to notice what needed doing before being asked. That quiet awareness became one of the greatest gifts their upbringing offered. Writing lessons remained peaceful. The room settled into familiar stillness. Each child bent carefully over the page. Pens moved slowly. Ink dried naturally. Mistakes happened, of course. A letter leaned too far. A line wandered unevenly across the page. Yet children no longer grew discouraged as quickly as they once had. Patience had quietly become part of their character. Errors could be corrected. Tomorrow offered another opportunity. There was no need to hurry through learning. Outside the classroom windows, seasons continued their patient work. The branches of old trees swayed gently in the breeze. Clouds drifted slowly across wide skies. Sunlight shifted little by little across the schoolyard. Even time itself seemed to move gently. At midday, children gathered beneath trees or along quiet stone walls to eat simple lunches. Bread, cheese, fruit. Sometimes a small slice of cake saved from home. Conversation drifted naturally among friends. Then silence settled comfortably once again. No one seemed troubled by quiet pauses. Children had discovered that friendship could grow just as easily during peaceful walks as during lively conversation. One friend might point toward a bird resting upon a nearby fence. The other simply nodded. Nothing more needed saying. The shared moment was enough. After lessons ended, the journey home carried a different feeling. The responsibilities of school had been completed. The afternoon belonged to home once more. Children walked a little more slowly. Some stopped to admire flowers blooming beside familiar cottages. Others paused upon small bridges to watch gentle streams flowing beneath. Water always seemed to invite quiet observation. It moved steadily without effort. The current carried fallen leaves beneath old stone arches. Tiny ripples reflected the afternoon sky. Many children found themselves lingering for a few peaceful moments before continuing home. The house welcomed them with familiar sounds. A broom sweeping across the hallway. A cupboard closing softly. The comforting smell of baking bread or simmering stew. Someone upstairs folding clean laundry. Someone downstairs polishing shoes for tomorrow. The home seemed alive through gentle activity rather than noise. Children stepped naturally into this rhythm. School clothes were brushed. Books placed neatly upon shelves. Then came the household tasks that quietly connected every member of the family. One child peeled apples. Another folded freshly ironed linens. Someone fetched wood from the shed. Someone else carefully watered flowers growing near the kitchen window. None of these jobs required excitement. They asked only for steady hands. Steady attention. Steady patience. As afternoon slowly slipped toward evening, sunlight filled the rooms with a warm golden glow. Dust floated lazily through the bright air. The ticking clock continued faithfully upon the mantel. Its steady rhythm had measured thousands of ordinary afternoons exactly like this one. Children scarcely noticed its sound anymore. Yet its quiet presence offered reassurance. Time continued moving exactly as it should. Nothing was lost. Nothing rushed ahead. The evening meal gathered everyone together again. Candles were lit as daylight slowly faded beyond the windows. The gentle glow softened every face around the table. Conversation remained calm. Parents asked about lessons. Children answered politely. Sometimes everyone simply enjoyed the meal in peaceful companionship. The silence no longer felt like something that needed explaining. It belonged to the family as naturally as the furniture or the walls themselves. After supper, familiar evening routines unfolded once more. Books appeared. Needles moved through cloth. A father repaired a loose chair leg. An older brother carefully cleaned muddy boots. A younger sister practiced reading aloud beside the fire. The room remained wonderfully calm. The fire crackled softly. The wind brushed gently against the windows outside. Occasionally someone smiled at a pleasant memory or quietly shared a short story from the day. Then silence returned once more, welcomed rather than avoided. As bedtime approached, children felt the gentle weight of pleasant tiredness settling over them. It was not the exhaustion of rushing. It was the peaceful weariness that followed a day filled with honest work, careful learning, thoughtful observation, and quiet companionship. One by one, candles were lifted from their holders. The staircase welcomed another evening procession toward bed. The familiar creak of the old steps echoed softly through the quiet house. Bedrooms waited with cool sheets and heavy blankets. Windows reflected the moonlight now resting over rooftops. Beyond the glass, the town had become almost completely silent. Only the distant ringing of a church bell reminded anyone that time continued moving through the peaceful night. Children slipped beneath warm covers. The sounds of the house slowly faded. A door closed gently downstairs. The fire settled into glowing embers. The clock continued its patient work. Tick, tick, tick. Those familiar sounds had accompanied nearly every evening of childhood. They had witnessed scraped knees and school lessons, birthdays and ordinary Tuesdays, rainy afternoons and sunny mornings. Always present. Always steady. And as another peaceful Victorian night gently wrapped itself around the sleeping town, silence settled once more over the little homes, not as something empty or lonely, but as something warm, familiar, and deeply comforting, a quiet companion that had patiently walked beside these children through every ordinary day, helping them grow without ever asking to be noticed. As childhood continued its quiet journey, the children themselves began to notice something that would have been difficult to understand when they were younger. The quiet moments they had once found difficult were now the moments they often sought. Not because anyone instructed them to do so. Not because silence had become another rule. But because they had discovered that peaceful places offered room for gentle thoughts. After the work of the morning was finished, and before the next task quietly arrived, there were often a few precious minutes that belonged to no one in particular. A child might step into the small garden behind the house. Another might sit upon the front steps where the morning sun warmed the old stone. Someone else might stand beside an upstairs window, watching the neighborhood slowly come to life. None of these moments appeared remarkable. Yet they became some of the richest parts of childhood. The garden changed a little every week. Fresh shoots appeared where only bare soil had rested before. Tiny buds slowly opened into flowers. Leaves grew broader beneath the spring sunshine. Children who helped care for these gardens noticed changes that others sometimes overlooked. One morning a single blossom appeared. Another morning brought the first butterfly of the season. Soon bees returned, moving patiently from flower to flower with quiet determination. Nothing in the garden seemed hurried. Everything arrived exactly when it was ready. The children watched this patient rhythm year after year. Without realizing it, they carried some of that patience into their own lives. The older members of the family often seemed especially comfortable outdoors. A grandfather might trim roses with careful hands. He never rushed from one plant to another. Each stem received quiet attention. Each cut was thoughtful. Children sometimes worked beside him. Very little conversation was needed. The gentle snip of the garden shears. The rustle of leaves in the breeze. The distant song of a thrush resting high in an elm tree. These sounds filled the comfortable silence between them. Sometimes a grandfather would stop working for a moment. He would simply look across the garden. The children often followed his gaze. They saw rows of vegetables growing steadily. Flower beds bright beneath the afternoon sun. Old brick walls warmed by years of changing seasons. Perhaps they did not fully understand why he paused. But they quietly learned that it was perfectly acceptable to stop for a moment simply to appreciate the world around them. Inside the house, another kind of quiet work continued. The laundry room smelled of clean soap and fresh linen. Sheets hung neatly upon drying lines. Children folded towels into careful squares. Every fold was made with attention. Corners matched neatly. Stacks remained straight. At first these tasks seemed ordinary. Later they became comforting. The simple movement of folding cloth asked the hands to slow down. The mind settled naturally into a peaceful rhythm. Even the sound of fabric brushing against fabric became familiar. The Victorian home contained countless little rhythms like these. A spoon gently stirring tea. A window opening to welcome fresh air. The steady brushing of crumbs from the dining table after a meal. the quiet closing of a well-read book. These actions happened every day. Because they happened so often, they rarely received much attention. Yet together they created the atmosphere in which childhood quietly unfolded. Many afternoons included time for practicing useful skills. Some children practiced careful handwriting. Others learned simple arithmetic until numbers no longer seemed mysterious. Music lessons also filled many homes. The piano stood patiently in the corner of the sitting room. Its polished wood reflected the afternoon light. A child sat upon the bench. Small hands rested carefully upon the keys. The first notes came slowly. Sometimes one finger hesitated before pressing the correct key. Mistakes happened. A note sounded too early. Another arrived too late. The melody paused, then began again. No one expected perfection after only a few lessons. Music required patience just as reading required patience. Just as sewing required patience. Just as growing older required patience. The room often became wonderfully still while someone practiced. Only the gentle notes floated through the air. Each one lingered for a moment before fading into silence. Children gradually discovered that music and quietness belonged together. Without silence, the soft notes could not be fully appreciated. The spaces between each phrase mattered almost as much as the melody itself. During rainy afternoons, the windows became small stages upon which nature quietly performed. Raindrops gathered along the upper edge of the glass. One by one they began their slow journey downward. Some traveled alone. Others joined together into larger streams. Children often watched these little rivers with surprising fascination. There was no competition. No hurry. Only water finding its own peaceful path. The rain also changed the sounds of the neighborhood. Horse hooves became softer upon wet streets. Carriage wheels rolled with gentle splashes. Voices drifted differently through the damp air. The entire town seemed wrapped in a blanket of calm. Inside, lamps were lit a little earlier than usual. The house felt warm and welcoming against the gray afternoon beyond the windows. Books appeared once more. Many children loved rainy days for this very reason. The weather seemed to invite everyone to remain indoors together. Parents read. Grandparents rested. Brothers and sisters completed quiet activities nearby. Even the family cat often seemed sleepier when rain filled the air. There was comfort in these shared afternoons. No one expected constant entertainment. The simple pleasure of being together felt entirely enough. As children entered their later years of childhood, they became more aware of the moods that quietly moved through the household. They noticed when a parent seemed tired after a difficult week. They noticed when a grandparent moved more slowly than before. They recognized joy in a mother's gentle smile after receiving a kind letter. They sensed concern when unexpected expenses required careful planning. These observations rarely came through dramatic conversations. More often they appeared through little changes. A quieter voice. A thoughtful pause. A longer glance out the window. Silence had taught children to notice these things. Because they noticed, they often responded with quiet kindness. A chore finished without being asked. A younger sibling cared for patiently. A favorite chair placed beside the fire before an older relative entered the room. These acts required very few words. Their meaning was understood without explanation. Even family celebrations carried this gentle atmosphere. Birthdays were certainly happy occasions. Special meals appeared upon the table. Perhaps a homemade cake. Perhaps a carefully wrapped gift. Laughter filled the room for a while. Yet after the celebration, peace returned naturally. The candles burned lower. The dishes were washed. Children carefully folded wrapping paper they wished to save. The evening settled back into its familiar calm. Joy and quietness lived comfortably together. They did not compete with one another. As another autumn approached, leaves once again drifted across garden paths. Children raked them into neat piles. The dry leaves whispered softly against the wooden rake. Golden sunlight filtered through thinning branches. The air carried the pleasant scent of earth preparing for winter. Nothing in nature seemed anxious about the changing season. The trees released their leaves patiently. The fields rested after harvest. Birds quietly prepared for colder days ahead. Children watched these yearly changes with growing understanding. Life moved in gentle circles. Each season brought different work, different colors, different sounds. Yet each returned again in its proper time. This steady pattern offered reassurance. Even difficult days eventually gave way to brighter mornings. Even long winters quietly welcomed spring once more. As darkness arrived, the familiar evening routines gently embraced the household. The lamps glowed. The fire warmed the room. Books rested upon waiting laps. The old clock marked another hour. Outside, the town gradually fell asleep beneath a sky filled with quiet stars. Inside, children prepared for bed with movements that had become almost effortless through years of repetition. Night clothes folded. Candles extinguished. Blankets lifted. The day slowly released its final thoughts. Lying quietly beneath warm covers, many children found that silence no longer felt like something outside themselves. It had become part of the peaceful landscape of their own minds. It offered space for gratitude, space for gentle memories, space for tomorrow's quiet hopes. And as sleep drew near once more, the calm rhythm of the Victorian home continued around them, the faithful ticking of the clock below, the last glowing embers in the fireplace, the soft whisper of the wind beyond the window holding another ordinary night with the same patient care that had gently shaped every day of their childhood. The night has become very still. The candles have burned low, leaving only a gentle glow that rests upon the quiet rooms of the old house. Outside, the streets that welcomed so many ordinary mornings now sleep beneath a peaceful sky. The windows are dark. The gardens rest beneath cool night air. The last carriage has long since disappeared into the distance, and even the church bell seems content to wait before marking another hour. Inside, the familiar clock continues its faithful work. Tick, tick, tick. Its quiet rhythm has measured an entire childhood. It has counted mornings filled with careful lessons, afternoons shaped by patient hands, and evenings warmed by family gathered around a fire. It has listened to whispered good nights, the turning of countless book pages, the gentle brushing of boots after rainy walks, and the soft closing of bedroom doors. The children who once wandered through these rooms with endless questions have grown little by little. Not all at once. Not through great adventures. Not through extraordinary moments that history books would remember. Instead, they were shaped by ordinary days. By the simple kindness of parents who quietly led by example. By teachers who believed steady effort mattered more than quick success. By grandparents whose peaceful routines carried the wisdom of many years. By brothers and sisters who learned to care for one another without expecting reward. Most of all, they were shaped by the quiet spaces between these moments. Those long pauses that once seemed empty slowly revealed themselves to be full of gentle lessons. Silence became the place where patience quietly took root. Where careful thoughts found room to grow. Where compassion learned to notice another person's tired eyes before a single word was spoken. where gratitude appeared during simple meals shared beneath warm candlelight. The world beyond their homes continued changing. New inventions arrived. Cities grew larger. Railways stretched farther across the countryside. The sound of progress slowly reached even the quietest streets. Yet inside many Victorian homes, the gentle rhythms of family life remained remarkably steady. Morning still followed night. Bread still baked in warm kitchens. Books still waited upon shelves. Gardens still welcomed each returning spring. Children still climbed familiar staircases at the close of another peaceful day. Years passed almost unnoticed. The little hands that once reached for guidance became hands capable of offering guidance to others. The quiet child who listened beside the fireplace one winter evening eventually became the calm parent reading beside another fireplace many years later. The lessons continued. Not because they were written into rules, but because they had become part of the heart. Perhaps that is why the smallest memories often remain the longest. The smell of fresh bread cooling beneath a linen cloth. The gentle warmth of a grandmother's hand resting upon a shoulder. The comforting creak of familiar stairs climbed every evening before bed. The glow of lamplight reflected in polished wood. The steady ticking of an old clock that never hurried, never complained, and never failed to greet another day. History often remembers kings. It remembers wars. It remembers great discoveries and remarkable achievements. But hidden beneath those larger stories are millions of quiet lives. Lives built from ordinary mornings. Simple kindness. Honest work. Patient learning. Peaceful evenings. The childhood of an ordinary Victorian child may never have changed the course of nations. Yet it shaped a human heart. And every gentle heart quietly shapes the world around it. Now the fire has settled into glowing embers. Its warmth lingers even as the last small flames fade into soft red light. Outside, a cool breeze moves gently through the trees. Leaves whisper together beneath the stars. Somewhere beyond the rooftops, an owl calls once before the night becomes still again. The river, unseen in the darkness, continues its slow and timeless journey. It does not hurry toward tomorrow. It simply flows, quietly and faithfully, beneath the moonlit sky, just as it has for countless generations. The house grows quieter still. Every room has settled into peaceful silence. Books rest closed upon their shelves. Chairs wait patiently beside the cold hearth. The day's work is finished. The week's work is finished. Even the memories seem content to rest. And if you listen very carefully, you might almost imagine those old Victorian homes still standing somewhere beneath the stars, their windows glowing softly with candlelight, their families gathered together in gentle peace, their quiet routines continuing one ordinary evening after another. The clock continues its calm rhythm. Tick, tick, tick. Each sound grows softer. Each moment drifts a little farther into the night. The voices fade. The footsteps disappear. The candles become only tiny points of light before gently slipping into darkness. Above it all, the stars remain, watching silently over sleeping rooftops, quiet gardens, winding lanes, and peaceful homes where another day has come to its gentle end. And with the night wrapped softly around the world, there is nothing more to do. Nothing more to carry. Nothing more to hurry toward. Only the quiet comfort of stillness. Only the slow breath of the sleeping world. Only the peaceful feeling of another ordinary day, lovingly remembered, before it gently fades into silence.